Have you ever wondered why, after months or even years of giving your energy, patience, and unconditional love to someone you believed was your twin flame, you eventually reached a state of total exhaustion? Perhaps you spent many sleepless nights questioning whether you were asking for too much, whether you should keep waiting, or whether you should lower your expectations even more just to accommodate someone who clearly was not ready to meet you at the same level of emotional maturity. But in time, you came to understand a powerful truth. You cannot rescue anyone from their own emotional immaturity. The moment arrives when you must begin saving yourself, and that moment becomes a turning point. When the divine feminine finally stops waiting and decides to set boundaries for the divine masculine, she begins to reclaim her own power. This energetic withdrawal initiates a spiritual recalibration. It is not revenge, and it is not punishment. It is simply energetic alignment. And the masculine senses this shift, not only emotionally, but also spiritually and even physically. Carl Jung recognized that authentic feminine energy carries a power that has been largely erased from collective awareness for thousands of years. It is a power that does not need to chase, persuade, or beg to be acknowledged. When this power is fully awakened, it becomes naturally magnetic through its integrity alone. Yet accessing this power requires every woman to pass a final inner test. She must prove to herself that she can love without losing herself, surrender without abandoning her identity, and recognize the divine in another person without denying the divine within herself. Today, we will explore exactly how this test unfolds, why it is necessary, and most importantly, what happens when a woman finally stops waiting for the masculine to awaken and instead chooses to awaken to her own greatness. Stay with this discussion until the end, because what you are about to understand may completely transform the way you view relationships, feminine power, and what it truly means to be loved by someone who is genuinely worthy of you. For a long time, you may have believed that loving someone meant giving everything you had. You may have thought that being feminine meant being receptive to the point of self-denial, and that spiritual connections required one-sided sacrifice from you. Perhaps you interpreted your natural ability to nurture, heal, and see potential in others as a responsibility to transform people who never asked to be transformed. Each time that person distanced themselves, each time they showed they could not match the depth of your devotion, you may have taken it as a signal that you needed to give more, wait longer, and understand them more deeply. However, there is a truth about the divine feminine that contradicts much of what patriarchal culture has taught about relationships. Real feminine power does not lie in endlessly adapting to another person's limitations. Instead, it lies in creating such a strong and elevated energetic presence that others must either rise to meet that level or gradually move away because they cannot sustain the frequency you embody. The divine feminine does not force anyone to grow. She simply stands firmly in her own magnificence and allows others to decide whether they want to participate in that higher reality. Through his deep studies of the anima and animus, Jung discovered that the feminine principle is naturally selective rather than pursuing. It is magnetic rather than aggressive. It resembles fertile soil that offers perfect conditions for certain seeds to grow, yet it does not chase particular seeds asking to be planted. When the earth provides rich soil, clean water, and sufficient light, the right seeds naturally move toward it and develop strong roots. Seeds that are not ready or mature cannot grow in that elevated environment and are carried by the wind toward places more compatible with their limitations. The final test of the divine feminine works in a similar way. It asks you to stop creating special conditions for one particular seed and instead offer your authentic conditions, trusting that this will attract what truly aligns with your essence, while naturally repelling what does not. But this test only begins when you reach the absolute limit of your ability to keep adapting. It begins when you fully realize that you cannot love someone more than they love themselves. Most importantly, it begins when you recognize that you have been quietly betraying your own needs to accommodate someone who has not shown the same willingness to grow and meet you halfway. Perhaps you spent months making compromises that conflicted with your integrity. You may have accepted small fragments of attention and interpreted them as deep love. You may have justified behaviors that hurt your soul because you believed understanding another person's weaknesses was a sign of spiritual maturity. Maybe you silenced your genuine needs so you would not appear demanding. Perhaps you minimized your pain to avoid conflict and settled for vague promises about a better future that never appeared in the present. The final test begins when you realize that this dynamic is not nourishing either of you. Your excessive patience may actually be allowing the other person to remain comfortable in emotional immaturity. Your limitless understanding may be acting as a shield that protects them from confronting their own limitations and evolving beyond them. Jung suggested that sometimes the most loving action we can take for another person is to stop supporting their stagnation through our excessive tolerance of their inconsistency. When a woman reaches this understanding, when she finally recognizes that she has been participating in her own diminishment, something profound shifts in her energetic field. She does not become cold or resentful. She becomes selective. She does not reject love, but she begins to require that love be accompanied by consistent actions, emotional responsibility, and the capacity for genuine reciprocity. This is the moment when the final test truly begins. The person who once benefited from her endless energy suddenly faces a new reality. That source of energy is no longer unconditional. The first sign that this final test is taking place is that you stop explaining your needs. For a long time, you may have tried to communicate in every possible way what you required from the relationship in order to feel valued, respected, and seen. You may have spoken gently and vulnerably, always offering understanding, always giving another chance, always believing that if you could only find the perfect words, the other person would finally understand and change their behavior. But when the divine feminine activates her authentic power and realizes that words without action are merely noise, she quietly stops explaining. Not out of coldness and not out of defeat, but because she understands that emotionally mature individuals do not need lengthy explanations about how to treat someone they truly care about. They naturally want to support, prioritize, and respect the person they love. And emotionally immature individuals rarely change through explanations, no matter how thoughtful or compassionate those explanations may be. When you stop explaining and instead demonstrate through your actions that you will no longer accept treatment that violates your dignity, the other person immediately senses the shift. It feels as though the magnetic field around you has changed. They may not be able to clearly describe what is different, but they recognize that you are no longer available in the same way. There is now a quiet inner strength within you that did not exist before. A stability that cannot easily be manipulated or ignored. The second sign is that you begin to develop a natural intolerance for behaviors that you once tolerated endlessly. This does not mean you become harsh or rigid. It simply means that your energy can no longer sustain patterns that drain your vitality without offering anything meaningful in return. It is as though your energetic system has developed a kind of immune response that automatically rejects anything toxic or unbalanced. Promises that once filled you with hope are now received with calm skepticism. and elaborate excuses that once touched your heart are now recognized for what they truly are: attempts to avoid genuine responsibility. Sporadic romantic gestures that once seemed enough to compensate for months of emotional distance are now recognized for what they truly are: unconscious attempts to keep you investing energy in a connection that is not genuinely evolving. You no longer feel the need to fight these behaviors or try to correct them through emotional reactions. Instead, you begin to withdraw your energy, create space, and focus your attention on activities and relationships that nourish your spirit rather than drain your vitality. This energetic withdrawal is neither passive nor rooted in resentment. It is active and intentional because it comes from the realization that you deserve experiences that respect your worth instead of taking advantage of your generosity. The third sign, and perhaps the most transformative one, is that you stop trying to rescue the connection. For a long time, you may have assumed the entire responsibility for keeping the relationship functioning. You built bridges when distance appeared, initiated conversations when silence took over, and offered solutions whenever conflicts arose. In many ways, you became the emotional manager of the connection, constantly monitoring the emotional climate between you, adjusting your behavior to preserve harmony, and forgiving offenses in order to prevent a permanent break. However, when the final test begins, when you truly understand that healthy relationships require effort and participation from both individuals, you stop carrying responsibility for the other person's happiness or emotional satisfaction. You stop trying to anticipate their emotional needs. You stop sacrificing your own stability to compensate for their instability. You also stop offering solutions to problems they never asked you to solve. This release of excessive emotional responsibility compels the other person to confront an important reality: whether they have the capacity to maintain an intimate relationship without being emotionally carried by someone else. They must decide whether they want to invest their own energy into nurturing what exists between you, or whether they are willing to allow the connection to fade through neglect. For the first time in a long while, you are no longer interfering with that decision through constant rescue efforts. Carl Jung understood that this withdrawal of emotional rescue can actually be one of the most loving acts the divine feminine offers to an emotionally immature masculine. It requires him to discover inner resources he may never have developed, while someone else was constantly managing the emotional responsibilities that were originally his. It is similar to removing the training wheels from a child's bicycle. When at first, the act may appear harsh, but it is often the only way for the child to learn whether they truly want to ride independently. When these three signs appear together, when you stop explaining, stop tolerating, and stop saving, something significant begins to change in the energetic space between you. The person who once relied on your unconditional energy suddenly faces the emptiness created by your withdrawal, and within that space, they must decide what role they truly want to play in your life. They must determine whether they are willing to grow into someone capable of matching the depth and sincerity of the love you offer, or whether they prefer to remain in the comfort zone of emotional immaturity. However, it is essential to understand one important truth. This process is not a strategy designed to manipulate someone into changing. It is a genuine recalibration of your self-worth and personal standards. That when you withdraw energetically and establish boundaries through your actions, you are doing it for yourself, not to provoke a specific reaction in the other person. You are choosing to honor your dignity rather than continue participating in a dynamic that diminishes your value. This distinction represents the fundamental difference between manipulation and authentic empowerment. Manipulation occurs when you alter your behavior to force a particular reaction from someone else. Empowerment occurs when you change your behavior because you have finally realized that you deserve to be treated in alignment with your true value, regardless of how the other person responds. Jung observed that when the divine feminine truly establishes herself in this energy of self-respect, when she genuinely chooses herself as a priority, two outcomes typically become possible. The first possibility is that the other person recognizes what they were about to lose through their neglect and rises to meet you at the level of maturity where the relationship should have existed from the beginning. They realize that the elevated presence you bring into their life cannot be taken for granted, and they develop the emotional responsibility necessary to honor it. The second possibility is that the person reveals their true nature through their inability to meet your new standard. They may withdraw completely, search for easier sources of validation, or even attempt to convince you that you have become too demanding, too distant, or too different from the person you used to be. If that happens, you have uncovered something deeply valuable. This individual was never your true twin flame. Instead, they were a disguised teacher whose presence in your life forced you to awaken to your own inner power. The final test is not designed to punish the divine masculine. Its purpose is to reveal whether he truly embodies divine masculine energy, or whether he is simply wounded masculine energy hidden behind spiritual language. A true divine masculine immediately recognizes when he is in the presence of an awakened divine feminine and naturally rises to meet her at her level. He does not resent her higher standards. He feels inspired by them. He does not attempt to dim her light to feel comfortable with his own limitations. Instead, he develops his own light so that both energies can coexist in harmony. In contrast, wounded masculine energy, no matter how spiritually disguised, often attempts to convince the feminine to lower her standards. It may encourage her to be more tolerant of limitations or to accept minimal effort as if it were something extraordinary. Spiritual language may even be used to justify emotional immaturity, speaking about unconditional love while quietly asking to receive love without offering genuine reciprocity. When you apply the final test and withdraw your energy from someone who does not demonstrate the ability to respect that energy, you are not acting out of cruelty or punishment. You are practicing discernment. You are using your natural capacity to decide what deserves your energy and what does not. This ability to discern is one of the most essential qualities the divine feminine can develop. Jung noted that women who never cultivate this energetic discernment often find themselves in relationships where they give far more than they receive. Their generosity is frequently exploited by individuals who lack the willingness or capacity to reciprocate in a meaningful way. Some may spend decades offering their emotional energy to people who treat them as optional rather than essential, as conveniences rather than something deeply valuable. But when a woman finally awakens to her power of choice, when she understands that her energy is sacred and should only be shared with those who demonstrate the capacity to honor it, her entire relationship experience begins to change. She stops attracting people who simply want to benefit from her light without developing their own. Instead, she begins attracting individuals who have already done their inner work and seek to share abundance rather than extract energy from someone who appears to have more than enough. The final test, therefore, reveals more than the true nature of the person you believed to be your twin flame. It also reveals your own ability to be selective, discerning, and protective of your valuable energy. It shows that you do not need to diminish yourself to make someone comfortable with their limitations. It reminds you that you do not need to explain your worth to people who lack the awareness to recognize it. And it teaches you that no one can rescue another person from emotional immaturity, because growth is ultimately an individual responsibility. When you pass the final test, When you prove to yourself that you are capable of choosing your dignity over the convenience of maintaining a connection that weakens you, something remarkable begins to shift within your energetic field. You naturally become magnetic to experiences and individuals who operate at the same level of integrity that you have developed. Not because you are using techniques of attraction, but because you are finally expressing your authentic frequency without distortions created by constantly adjusting yourself to accommodate the limitations of others. And if the person who experiences this final test truly is your divine counterpart, if they genuinely possess the capacity to grow beyond their former limitations, your energetic withdrawal may become the catalyst for their awakening. It can push them to confront their own resistance to growth, their fears of real intimacy, and their habit of taking unconditional love for granted, rather than honoring it as something precious that must be respected every day through consistent actions. Carl Jung understood that sometimes people must lose something temporarily in order to fully appreciate its value. If this person truly is your twin flame, they will not respond with bitterness or resentment toward your new standards. Instead, they will recognize that you are acting from a place of healthy self-respect and will begin developing the same self-respect necessary to become worthy of the connection you could create together. However, if their response is resistance, if they attempt to make you feel guilty for establishing standards, or try to convince you that valuing yourself more has somehow made you worse, then the answer becomes clear. That individual was not capable of loving the authentic and empowered version of you. They were only comfortable loving the diminished version who accepted less than she truly deserved. And anyone who can only appreciate you when you operate below your true potential should not have intimate access to your life. The final test of the divine feminine is not cruel. It is essential. It represents a rite of passage that every woman must cross in order to discover whether she can love without losing herself, surrender without abandoning herself, and remain generous without allowing herself to be exploited. It marks the difference between loving from scarcity and loving from abundance. It is the difference between needing someone in order to feel complete and choosing someone to share the completeness you already possess. When you pass this test, when you prove to yourself that you can prioritize your dignity above any specific relationship, you develop a rare quality that very few individuals truly possess: the ability to love deeply without becoming emotionally submissive. The ability to be generous without becoming naive. The ability to recognize the divine in another person while still honoring the divine within yourself. This transformation does not only influence your romantic relationships, it reshapes every connection in your life. You become capable of establishing clear and healthy boundaries without guilt. You learn to offer your energy only where it is genuinely appreciated. You begin creating relationships based on real reciprocity rather than one-sided sacrifice. You become a living example of how the divine feminine can embody both strength and compassion at the same time. Powerful yet loving, receptive yet firm, selective yet generous. If you recognized your own journey in what I described, if it felt as though these words reflected the exact crossroads you are facing right now, then you may be ready for tools that can accelerate your transformation and help you fully integrate this new level of feminine power that is awakening within you. I have created exclusive materials based on some of the deepest teachings about the development of the feminine psyche. The first is 21 Days of Transformation with Carl Jung, a practical guide designed to teach specific techniques for establishing healthy, energetic boundaries, strengthening spiritual discernment in relationships, and transforming patterns of self-sacrifice into patterns of conscious self-worth. For 21 days, you will work with practical exercises aimed at reclaiming your authentic feminine power and applying it in ways that honor both your natural generosity and your legitimate need for reciprocity. The second resource is the Survival Manual for Difficult Times. I created it because even when you understand intellectually that you are making the right decisions, some days can still feel emotionally challenging. There is also the e-book, How to Manifest Your Twin Flame, a comprehensive guide inspired by revolutionary insights about individuation and soul recognition. In this work, I explain the deeper principles Jung identified about consciously attracting your true twin flame by first developing your own inner wholeness. You will find the links to these materials in the first pinned comment below this video. And now I would like to know who truly connected with the depth of what was shared here. Write in the comments, "I choose my own worth." If you feel that the moment has arrived to apply the final test in your own life, if you are ready to discover whether the person you love can meet you at the level of maturity that a genuine connection requires. Remember, only a small percentage of women who reach this crossroads actually have the courage to apply this test. Many continue accepting small fragments of love, repeatedly explaining needs that should already be obvious, and trying to maintain connections that should naturally sustain themselves through mutual effort. But you reached this point because something within you knows that you are capable of more. You are capable of being loved in the way you have always sensed you deserved, by someone who recognizes the treasure you are and treats that treasure with the respect it deserves. The final test is not about punishing anyone. It is about discovering who is truly worthy of sharing the higher version of your life. It is about creating space for authentic love by no longer filling that space with convenient substitutes. It is about trusting that when you firmly establish your own worth, when you express your true magnificence without apology, life naturally brings people who can move in harmony with that elevated energy. Thank you for having the courage to recognize that you deserve more than small fragments of affection presented as great love. I will see you in the next video.